Grace's hands trembled as she handed her lunch to the homeless man outside the hospital, but it wasn't from the cold Boston wind. Something about his eyes, deep, intelligent, haunted, made her heart race in a way she didn't understand. "Thank you," he whispered, and when their fingers brushed, Grace felt a spark that would change both their lives forever. She had no idea that the dirty, hungry stranger she was helping was actually Benjamin Park, a billionaire CEO who'd lost everything to betrayal. And she definitely didn't know that her simple act of kindness would lead to a passionate love story filled with danger, courtroom battles, and a romance that would prove love conquers all. The autumn wind bit through Grace Mbala's thin jacket as she hurried down Tremont Street in Boston, clutching a brown paper bag containing her lunch. She was already late for her nursing shift at Memorial Hospital, but something made her stop dead in her tracks. A man sat slumped against the brick wall of the hospital's side entrance, his expensive-looking coat torn and filthy, his dark hair matted and unwashed. But it wasn't his appearance that caught Grace's attention. It was his eyes. Even through the dirt and exhaustion, those eyes held something she recognized from her own journey from Cameroon to America. The look of someone who had lost everything but refused to give up hope. "Sir, are you okay?" Grace knelt beside him, her nurse instincts kicking in immediately. The man looked up slowly, and Grace felt her breath catch. Beneath the grime, he was strikingly handsome with sharp features and a strong jaw. His clothes, though dirty, were clearly expensive ones. This wasn't an ordinary homeless man. "I'm fine," he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. "Please, don't let me make you late for work." Grace glanced at her watch. She had 3 minutes before her shift started, and her supervisor, Mrs. Chen, had already warned her about being late twice this week. But something in her heart wouldn't let her walk away. "When did you last eat?" she asked. The man thought for a moment. "Tuesday, I think. What day is today?" "It's Friday," Grace said softly, her heart breaking. She opened her brown bag and pulled out her carefully prepared lunch. A chicken sandwich with lettuce and tomatoes, a container of her homemade pepper soup, and an apple. It was supposed to sustain her through a 12-hour shift, but she couldn't walk away from this stranger. "Here," she said, pressing the food into his hands. "Please eat this." The man stared at the food, then at Grace, and something shifted in his expression. His eyes became glassy with unshed tears. "I can't take your lunch. You need it." "I need to know you've eaten more than you need that food," Grace insisted. "Please, it would make me happy." Their fingers touched as he accepted the bag, and Grace felt an unexpected jolt of electricity run through her body. The man must have felt it too because his eyes widened slightly. "Thank you," he whispered. "You have no idea what this means to me. What's your name?" "Grace. Grace Mbala." "Grace," he repeated as if testing how it sounded. "That's perfect. You're an angel." "And you are?" Grace asked, standing up and brushing off her scrubs. The man hesitated. Benjamin Park." "Well, Benjamin Park, I hope things get better for you." Grace started to walk toward the hospital entrance, then turned back. "I work here every day. Same time tomorrow. I'll bring you breakfast. Don't disappear on me, okay?" Before he could respond, Grace rushed inside, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with being late. She didn't understand why, but something about Benjamin Park made her feel things she hadn't felt since leaving Cameroon 3 years ago. What Grace didn't know was that Benjamin Park was watching her disappear through the glass doors with an expression of wonder on his face. For 3 weeks, he'd been living on the streets of Boston, hiding from his former business partner who had stolen his billion-dollar technology company through forged documents and betrayal. Benjamin had trusted Richard Sterling like a brother, only to wake up one morning to find his bank accounts frozen, his company shares transferred, and his reputation destroyed by lies spread through the media. He'd been the CEO of Tech Vision Industries, a company worth $3 billion that developed artificial intelligence software for hospitals. At 35 years old, he'd been on top of the world. Then, Richard, his co founder and supposed best friend, had struck like a snake. Richard had been planning the takeover for 2 years, carefully forging Benjamin's signatures, bribing board members, and creating fake evidence that Benjamin was stealing company money. The morning everything fell apart, Benjamin had narrowly escaped being arrested on false charges. His lawyer, Thomas Wu, had told him to disappear while they gathered evidence to fight back. So Benjamin had been living on the streets, using the time to think and plan, waiting for Thomas to find the proof they needed. But 3 weeks of sleeping in alleys and going hungry had worn him down. This morning, he'd actually thought about giving up, about letting Richard win. Then, Grace appeared like an actual angel, with her warm brown eyes, her bright smile, and her kind heart. Benjamin opened the paper bag with shaking hands and pulled out the sandwich. The first bite was heaven. As he ate, tears rolled down his cheeks. It wasn't just the food, it was the fact that this beautiful stranger had given up her own meal for him without hesitation, had looked at him like he was a human being worth caring about, not the piece of trash everyone else saw when they passed him on the street. The pepper soup was still warm, spicy, and rich, reminding him of the Korean stews his grandmother used to make before she died. Grace had made this with her own hands, with love and care, and she'd given it to a dirty stranger on the street. Benjamin made a decision right there. He would take back his company. He would destroy Richard Sterling, and somehow, some way, he would repay Grace Mbala for this kindness. He would give her the world if she let him. Inside the hospital, Grace tried to focus on her patients, but her mind kept wandering to Benjamin. There was something about him that didn't fit. His hands, though dirty, weren't calloused like most homeless people she'd seen. His teeth were perfect and white, and that coat, despite being torn and filthy, was a brand she recognized from window shopping on Newberry Street. It cost more than she made in 3 months. Who was Benjamin Park really? Grace. Patient in room 304 needs his medication now. Mrs. Chen's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. Grace jumped into action, pushing thoughts of the mysterious stranger aside. But when her shift ended 12 hours later and her stomach was growling from skipping lunch, she found herself smiling. Tomorrow, she would see him again. Tomorrow, she would bring enough food for both of them. She didn't know that tomorrow would be the beginning of a love story that would change both their lives forever. As Grace walked to the subway station that evening, Benjamin was across the street, watching her from the shadows. He'd cleaned himself up a bit in a public restroom and had been waiting for hours just to see her again. Thomas had called with news. They'd found something, a thread they could pull that might unravel Richard's whole scheme. But Benjamin barely heard the details. All he could think about was the woman with the kind eyes who'd treated him like he mattered. "I'll make you proud, Grace," Benjamin whispered into the night air. "I promise." 3 blocks away, in a luxury penthouse office, Richard Sterling sat behind a massive desk, laughing on the phone with his assistant Victor Kane. "Any sign of Benjamin?" Richard asked, swirling expensive whiskey in a crystal glass. "Nothing, sir. He's probably dead in a ditch somewhere. You won. Tech Vision is yours." Richard smiled coldly. "Good. Make sure it stays that way. If Benjamin Park ever shows his face again, I want to know immediately. And Victor, make sure he regrets it if he does." Richard had no idea that his former partner was very much alive, or that a simple act of kindness from a Cameroonian nurse was about to set in motion events that would bring his entire empire crashing down. As night fell over Boston, 3 lives were set on a collision course. Grace dreamed of brown eyes filled with secrets. Benjamin planned his comeback with renewed determination, and Richard Sterling celebrated a victory that would soon turn to ashes. The sandwich that changed everything was just the beginning. Grace arrived at the hospital the next morning carrying 2 large containers of food and a thermos of hot coffee. Her roommate, Patience, had given her a strange look when she'd woken up at 5 in the morning to start cooking. But Grace didn't care. Something told her Benjamin would be waiting, and she wasn't going to let him down. Sure enough, as she rounded the corner to the side entrance, there he was. But this time, he'd cleaned himself up. His hair was washed and combed back, his face scrubbed clean, and he wore different clothes, still worn but much cleaner. Grace's heart did a little flip when she saw him properly for the first time. He was absolutely gorgeous. "You came back," Benjamin said, standing up quickly. His smile transformed his entire face, and Grace felt warmth spread through her chest. "I promised, didn't I?" Grace handed him one of the containers. "I made a kara and boiled plantains. There's also bread and eggs and coffee in the thermos." Benjamin took the food with both hands, his fingers brushing against hers again. That same electric feeling shot between them, stronger this time. They both felt it, and neither pulled away immediately. "Grace, I don't know how to thank you," Benjamin said quietly. "You didn't have to do this." "Maybe I wanted to," Grace replied, surprised by her own boldness. "Besides, you look like you could use a friend." "I could use a lot of things," Benjamin said, his voice dropping lower. "But a friend is a good start." They sat together on the steps, eating breakfast as the sun rose over Boston. Grace told him about growing up in Douala, Cameroon, about studying nursing and dreaming of coming to America. Benjamin listened intently, asking questions, laughing at her stories about the culture shock of her first winter in Boston. "Your turn," Grace said, wiping her hands on a napkin. "Tell me about Benjamin Park, and don't give me the short version. I want the real story." Benjamin set down his coffee and looked at her for a long moment. Grace saw him wrestling with something internal, deciding whether to trust her. Finally, he took a deep breath. "3 weeks ago, I was the CEO of a $3 billion company," he began. Grace's eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. "Tech Vision Industries. We develop AI software for hospitals, actually. Ironic that I'm sitting outside one now." Benjamin's voice was bitter. "I built that company from nothing with my best friend, Richard Sterling. Or at least, I thought he was my best friend. Turns out he'd been planning to steal it from me for 2 years." "How can someone steal a whole company?" Grace asked, leaning forward. "Very carefully and very illegally," Benjamin said. "Richard forged my signature on documents transferring my shares to him. He bribed board members. He created fake evidence that I was embezzling money. One morning, I woke up to find my bank accounts frozen, the FBI asking questions, and my face all over the news as a thief and a fraud." "But if it's all fake, why are you hiding?" Grace asked. "Why not go to the police?" "Because Richard has powerful friends, and without proof, it's his word against mine. My lawyer Thomas told me to disappear while he gathers evidence, so I've been on the streets, staying, invisible, waiting." Benjamin looked directly into Grace's eyes. "Until yesterday, I was ready to give up. Then you gave me that sandwich and you looked at me like I was a person worth saving. You reminded me that I have something worth fighting for." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "Everyone is worth saving, Benjamin." "Not everyone would think so. Most people look at me and see trash to step over." Benjamin reached out and gently touched Grace's hand. "But you saw me, really saw me. Why?" Grace thought about the question. "In Cameroon, we have a saying, 'The hand that gives is the hand that receives blessings.' But it's more than that. When I looked at you yesterday, I saw someone who was lost but not broken. I saw strength and dignity, even in your lowest moment. I saw someone I wanted to know. The air between them grew thick with tension. Benjamin moved closer, his eyes dropping to Grace's lips. I want to know you too, Grace Mbala, he whispered. Every single thing about you. Before Grace could respond, her phone alarm beeped. Her shift was starting in 2 minutes. I have to go, she said reluctantly, standing up. But Benjamin, I want to help you. Whatever you need to fight Richard and get your company back, I'll help. Benjamin stood too, capturing her hand in both of his. You've already helped more than you know. But Grace, this could get dangerous. Richard won't hesitate to hurt people who get in his way. I'm not afraid, Grace said firmly. Come to my apartment tonight. We can talk properly and figure out a plan. I live at 428 Columbus Avenue, apartment 3B. 7 o'clock? Benjamin stared at her in amazement. You're inviting a homeless man to your apartment? I'm inviting Benjamin Park, former CEO and future champion, to my apartment, Grace corrected with a smile. There's a difference. Will you come? Wild horses couldn't keep me away, Benjamin said. Grace squeezed his hand once more, then rushed into the hospital, her heart pounding. She couldn't believe what she'd just done. Patience was going to think she'd lost her mind, inviting a stranger to their apartment. But Grace trusted her instincts, and every instinct was screaming that Benjamin Park was special. At 6:30 that evening, Grace paced her small apartment nervously. She'd changed clothes 3 times and had spent 2 hours cooking a traditional Cameroonian meal of indole and fufu. Patience had taken one look at her and declared she was staying at her boyfriend's place for the night. Girl, you've got that look in your eyes, Patience had said with a knowing smile. The I'm about to do something crazy look. Just be safe, okay? Text me every hour to let me know you're alive. When the knock came at exactly 7 o'clock, Grace jumped. She opened the door to find Benjamin standing there holding a small bunch of flowers that looked like he'd picked them from a public garden. He'd cleaned up even more and was wearing a suit that had seen better days but still fit him perfectly. You look beautiful, Benjamin said, his eyes roaming over her appreciatively. Grace had worn a simple yellow dress that hugged her curves, and from the heat in Benjamin's gaze, he definitely noticed. Come in, Grace said, stepping back. I hope you're hungry. I made enough food to feed an army. It smells incredible, Benjamin said, following her inside. His eyes took in the tiny but immaculately clean apartment, the colorful African fabrics draped over the furniture, the photos of Grace's family on the walls. You've made a real home here. They ate dinner at Grace's small table, the conversation flowing easily. Benjamin told her more about Tech Vision Industries, about the technology they'd developed that was revolutionizing patient care in hospitals across America. Grace told him about her dreams of becoming a head nurse, maybe even opening her own clinic someday. You will, Benjamin said with certainty. You're the kind of person who makes things happen, Grace. I can see it in you. After dinner, they moved to the couch with coffee. Benjamin pulled out his phone, apparently the only possession he'd managed to keep, and showed Grace photos from before everything fell apart. Pictures of him in board meetings, cutting ribbons at hospital openings, shaking hands with politicians and celebrities. That's who you really are, Grace said softly, studying a photo of Benjamin in an expensive tuxedo at some gala event. You should be living in a mansion, not sleeping on the street. Right now, I'd rather be here with you than anywhere else in the world, Benjamin said, his voice intense. He set the phone down and turned to face Grace fully. I need to tell you something, and I need you to believe me. What is it? Grace asked, her heart racing. From the moment you handed me that sandwich yesterday, something changed inside me. I know it sounds crazy. We barely know each other. But Grace, I feel connected to you in a way I've never felt with anyone. Benjamin reached out and cupped her cheek gently. I'm going to get my company back. I'm going to destroy Richard Sterling. And then I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret the day you showed kindness to a stranger on the street. Grace leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. That's a big promise, Benjamin Park. I always keep my promises, Benjamin whispered, leaning closer. Their lips met in a kiss that was soft at first, tentative, testing. Then, Benjamin's hand slid into Grace's hair and pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened, became hungry and desperate. Grace responded with equal passion, her hands gripping his shoulders as months of loneliness melted away in his arms. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Benjamin rested his forehead against hers. Stay, Grace whispered. Don't go back to the streets tonight. Please, Benjamin, stay here with me. Benjamin pulled back to look at her, his eyes dark with desire, but also concern. Grace, are you sure? I don't want you to think that I'm taking advantage of your kindness. I'm sure, Grace said firmly. She stood up and held out her hand. Come with me. Benjamin took her hand and let her lead him to her bedroom. What happened next was tender and passionate, two lonely souls finding comfort and connection in each other's arms. They talked and kissed and explored each other until the early morning hours, learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal intensity. As Grace fell asleep in Benjamin's arms, she felt more complete than she had in years. She didn't care that he was homeless or that he came with complications. All she knew was that this felt right in a way nothing else ever had. Benjamin lay awake, stroking Grace's hair and watching her sleep. He'd never believed in fate or destiny, but he was starting to think maybe the universe had brought them together for a reason. Grace made him want to be better, stronger, worthy of the faith she had in him. His phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Found something big. We need to meet. Tomorrow. This could change everything. Benjamin smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow, the fight would begin. But tonight, he had Grace warm and safe in his arms, and that was all that mattered. Across the city, Richard Sterling stood at his penthouse window, looking out over Boston with a sense of satisfaction. Tech Vision was his. The board had just approved a merger deal that would make him even richer. Everything was perfect. His phone rang. It was Victor Kane. Boss, we might have a problem, Victor said. Someone's been asking questions about the documents you used to take over the company. A lawyer named Thomas Wu. He was Benjamin Park's personal attorney. Richard's blood ran cold. Find out what he knows. And find out if Benjamin is alive. If he is, I want him found and dealt with. Permanently this time. Yes, sir, Victor said. Richard hung up and poured himself a drink. He'd worked too hard to steal this company to let Benjamin ruin it now. If his former partner was foolish enough to show his face again, Richard would make sure he disappeared for good. The game was about to get deadly, and none of them knew just how high the stakes would become. The morning sun streamed through Grace's bedroom window, waking Benjamin from the best sleep he'd had in weeks. Grace was curled against his chest, her breathing soft and even. He tightened his arms around her, still barely believing this incredible woman had welcomed him into her life so completely. Grace stirred and opened her eyes, smiling when she saw him watching her. Good morning, she whispered. The best morning, Benjamin replied, kissing her forehead. Grace, about last night, I want you to know that it meant everything to me. You mean everything to me. I feel the same way, Grace said, reaching up to trace his jaw with her fingers. I know it's fast, and people would say we're crazy, but I don't care. This feels right. Benjamin caught her hand and kissed her palm. I have to meet with Thomas today. He says he found something important. Come with me? Grace nodded. Let me call in sick to work. This is more important. 2 hours later, they sat in a small coffee shop in Cambridge across from Thomas Wu, a sharp-eyed lawyer in his 40s who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Thomas kept staring at Grace with curiosity, clearly wondering who this woman was and why Benjamin trusted her enough to bring her to this meeting. "Thomas, this is Grace Mbala," Benjamin said, taking Grace's hand on top of the table. "She's the reason I'm still fighting. You can trust her completely." Thomas nodded slowly. "Well then, Grace, welcome to the team. Benjamin, I found something that could blow this whole case wide open. Do you remember Susan Chen, the IT director who quit TechVision 2 months before Richard made his move?" "Of course," Benjamin said. "Susan was brilliant. I was shocked when she resigned. She said she got a better offer in California." "She lied," Thomas said, pulling out a folder. "I tracked her down. She's been living in Baltimore, hiding, terrified. Richard paid her $50,000 to plant backdoor access codes in the company's systems that would let him forge digital signatures. He made her do it, but then he threatened her family when she tried to go to the authorities. She's been too scared to come forward until now." "What changed?" Grace asked, leaning forward. "I convinced her that we could protect her if she testifies against Richard," Thomas said. "And I showed her the evidence of what Richard's been doing with TechVision since he took over. He's been selling the hospital AI software to insurance companies so they can deny patient claims more efficiently. It's exactly the opposite of what Benjamin built the company to do. Help patients, not hurt them." Benjamin's jaw clenched. "That's disgusting. Our software was designed to improve patient outcomes, not help insurance companies find ways to avoid paying for care." "Susan was furious when she found out," Thomas continued. "She's ready to give us everything, emails, recordings, documents, but there's a problem. All the evidence is on a backup server that Susan created secretly. The server is in a storage unit in Baltimore that's registered under a fake name. We need to get to Baltimore and retrieve those files before Richard figures out they exist." "Then, let's go," Benjamin said immediately. "Today. Right now." "Benjamin, it's not that simple," Thomas warned. "If Richard finds out we're onto him, he'll destroy the evidence and probably come after all of us. We need to be smart about this." "I can get time off work," Grace said suddenly. Both men turned to look at her. "I have vacation days saved up. I'll tell the hospital it's a family emergency. We can drive to Baltimore, get the evidence, and be back before anyone even knows we're gone." Benjamin shook his head. "Grace, no. This is getting dangerous. I can't ask you to risk yourself like this." "You're not asking, I'm offering," Grace said firmly. "Benjamin, you gave me a purpose yesterday. You made me feel like I matter, like I can make a real difference. Let me do this with you. Please." Benjamin looked at Thomas, who shrugged. "Actually, it might be smart to have Grace come along. Richard's people are looking for you, Benjamin, but they don't know about Grace. If we use her car and she does the driving, we're less likely to attract attention." "Fine," Benjamin said reluctantly. "But Grace, you stay in the car when we get to the storage unit. No arguments." Grace smiled and kissed his cheek. "We'll see about that." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Grace packed a bag and told her supervisor, Mrs. Chen, about a fake family emergency in Baltimore. Benjamin borrowed clothes from Thomas since everything he owned had been lost when Richard destroyed his life. Thomas gave them keys to the storage unit and detailed instructions on how to access the backup server. That night, as Grace and Benjamin loaded her old Honda with supplies for the trip, Grace's phone rang. It was her mother calling from Cameroon. "Mama, I can't talk long," Grace said in their native language. "I'm about to go on a trip." "Grace, I had a dream about you," her mother said, her voice worried. "You were standing at a crossroads and there was danger on both paths. Promise me you'll be careful, my daughter. Promise me you're not doing anything foolish." Grace glanced at Benjamin, who was checking the car's tires. "Mama, I promise I'm being careful, but sometimes we have to take risks for the people we love." "Love?" Her mother's voice rose. "Grace, you never mentioned a man. Who is he? What's happening?" I'll tell you everything when I get back, Grace said. I love you, Mama. Pray for me. She hung up before her mother could ask more questions. Benjamin straightened up and came to her side. Everything okay? He asked. My mother has dreams that sometimes come true, Grace admitted. She saw danger in my future. Benjamin, are you sure we should do this? Maybe we should let Thomas handle it alone. Benjamin pulled her close. If you want to back out, I'll understand. But Grace, I need you to know something. These past 2 days with you have been the happiest of my life. Whatever happens in Baltimore, whatever happens with Richard and the company, I'm grateful for every moment I've spent with you. Grace kissed him deeply, pouring all her feelings into it. Then, let's go fight for our future together. They left Boston at midnight, driving through the darkness toward Baltimore. Benjamin navigated while Grace drove, and they talked about everything: their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Benjamin told her about his grandmother who raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 10. Grace told him about leaving Cameroon and how hard it was to build a new life in America alone. You're not alone anymore, Benjamin said, taking her hand. Whatever happens, we're in this together now. They reached Baltimore just as the sun was rising. The storage facility was in a rough neighborhood, the kind of place where people minded their own business. Thomas had arranged for them to meet him there at 8 in the morning. But when they pulled into the parking lot, Grace felt a chill run down her spine. Benjamin, look. A black SUV was parked near the entrance to the storage units. Two large men in suits stood beside it looking exactly like the kind of people Richard Sterling would hire to do his dirty work. How did they find this place? Benjamin muttered, his face going pale. Thomas said this location was completely secret. Only Susan knew about it. Maybe they followed Thomas? Grace suggested. What do we do? Benjamin thought quickly. We can't let them get that evidence. Grace, drive around to the back of the facility. There has to be another entrance. I'll call Thomas and warn him to stay away. Grace's hands were shaking as she drove around the building, but she forced herself to stay calm. Benjamin was depending on her. She found a service entrance that was chained shut but looked like it could be forced open. Wait here, Benjamin said, reaching for the door handle. Absolutely not, Grace said, turning off the engine. You said it yourself. We're in this together. Before Benjamin could argue, Grace was out of the car. Together, they approached the chain link fence. Benjamin pulled at the chain until it snapped, and they slipped through into the maze of storage units. Susan said it's Unit 247, Benjamin whispered, checking his phone. This way. They crept through the facility, staying low and quiet. Grace's heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. They found Unit 247 at the end of a long row. Benjamin pulled out the key Thomas had given him and unlocked the door. Inside was a single metal box connected to a battery pack and a small generator. This was the server that held all the evidence against Richard Sterling. We need to take the whole thing, Benjamin said, unplugging cables. Help me lift it. The server was heavier than it looked, but together they managed to carry it toward the back entrance. They were almost to Grace's car when a voice called out behind them. Well, well, Benjamin Park. Richard said you were like a cockroach, too stupid to stay dead. They turned to find Victor Kane, Richard's head of security, standing with the two men from the SUV. Victor was a massive man with cold eyes and a cruel smile. Put down the server and walk away, Victor said, pulling out a gun. Or I'll put bullets in both of you, Grace gasped, but Benjamin stepped in front of her protectively. You're not going to shoot us in broad daylight, Victor. Too many witnesses. You'd be surprised what I'm willing to do for the right price, Victor said. Richard pays very well to keep problems quiet. Now, the server. Last chance. Grace's mind raced. She couldn't let Victor take the evidence. Everything they'd worked for. Benjamin's whole future depended on what was in that metal box. Run, Grace whispered to Benjamin. What? No, I'm not leaving you, Benjamin hissed back. Grace didn't give him a choice. She suddenly screamed as loud as she could and shoved the server into Benjamin's arms. Run! Get to the car! Her scream echoed through the facility, and lights started turning on in nearby buildings. Victor cursed and lunged for Grace, but she was already moving, running in the opposite direction from Benjamin, drawing Victor and his men away. Grace? No! Benjamin shouted, but he understood what she was doing. If he didn't save the evidence, her sacrifice would be for nothing. He ran for the car, his heart breaking with every step. Grace was fast, but Victor was faster. He caught her after half a block, his hand closing around her arm like a vice. Grace fought with everything she had, scratching and kicking. But he was too strong. You're going to regret that, little girl, Victor snarled, dragging her toward the SUV. Suddenly, a car engine roared. Grace looked up to see her Honda barreling toward them, Benjamin behind the wheel with a look of fury on his face. Victor had to jump out of the way or be hit, and in that moment, he released Grace's arm. Get in! Benjamin shouted, and Grace dove through the open passenger door. Benjamin floored the accelerator, tires squealing as they sped away. Behind them, Victor was screaming into his phone, probably calling for backup. Are you insane? Benjamin yelled at Grace as they raced through Baltimore streets. You could have been killed. So could you, Grace shouted back. We got the server, didn't we? We won. Benjamin glanced at the metal box in the back seat, then at Grace, and suddenly he started laughing. Grace joined in, the adrenaline and fear turning into slightly hysterical giggles. We're completely crazy, Benjamin said. Completely, Grace agreed, reaching over to grab his hand. But we make a good team. They drove straight to Thomas's office in Boston, not stopping except for gas. The lawyer's eyes widened when he saw them burst through his door carrying the server. What happened? You both look terrible, Thomas exclaimed. Richard's people found the storage unit, Benjamin explained quickly. We barely got out. Thomas, we need to move fast. If Victor reports back to Richard, he's going to know we have evidence against him. Thomas nodded, already pulling out his phone. I'll call the FBI. With what Susan's willing to testify to and whatever's on this server, we should have enough to get arrest warrants. But Benjamin, you both need to stay somewhere safe. Richard is going to come after you hard now. He can come to my apartment, Grace said. I'll take some more days off work. We'll stay together until this is over. Back at Grace's apartment, the adrenaline finally wore off and reality set in. Benjamin pulled Grace into his arms, his whole body shaking. Don't ever risk yourself like that again. He said into her hair, Grace, when I saw Victor grab you, I died inside. I can't lose you. I can't. You won't, Grace promised, holding him tight. We're going to beat Richard and then we're going to build a life together. I believe that with everything in me. That night, they made love with a desperate intensity, both needing to feel alive and connected after the danger they'd faced. Afterwards, wrapped in each other's arms, Benjamin whispered promises of the future they would build together. When this is over, I'm going to marry you, Grace Mbala, he said. I'm going to give you everything you've ever dreamed of and more. I don't need everything, Grace said softly. I just need you. But neither of them knew that the real danger was just beginning. In his penthouse, Richard Sterling had just gotten off the phone with Victor, and his face was twisted with rage. Find them, Richard ordered. I want Benjamin Park and this nurse who's helping him. And Victor, make sure they understand what happens to people who cross me. Make it hurt. The battle lines were drawn, and the war was about to begin. The courtroom was packed with reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers. Grace sat in the front row, her hands clenched in her lap as she watched Benjamin take the stand. He looked powerful and confident in the expensive suit Thomas had bought for him, every inch the billionaire CEO he used to be. But Grace could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched when Richard Sterling walked into the room. Richard looked smug and relaxed, surrounded by 5 high-priced lawyers. He smiled at Benjamin like they were old friends, and Grace felt rage boil in her chest. This man had destroyed Benjamin's life, stolen his company, and was now trying to destroy what they were building together. The trial had been going on for 3 days already. Thomas had presented the evidence from Susan Chen's server, thousands of emails and documents proving that Richard had systematically forged Benjamin's signatures, bribed board members, and manipulated stock prices. Susan herself had testified the day before, her voice shaking as she described how Richard had threatened her children if she didn't help him steal the company. But Richard's lawyers were vicious. They attacked every piece of evidence, suggested that Susan was lying for money, and painted Benjamin as a bitter former partner who couldn't accept that the company had outgrown him. Now it was Benjamin's turn to testify. "Mr. Park," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court about your relationship with Richard Sterling." Benjamin took a deep breath. "Richard and I met in college. We were both studying computer science at MIT. He was my roommate, my best friend, the person I trusted most in the world. When we graduated, we started Tech Vision Industries together in my grandmother's garage. For 10 years, we built that company side by side. I thought we were partners. I thought we were brothers. When did you first suspect that Mr. Sterling was planning to steal your company?" the prosecutor asked. "I didn't suspect anything until the day I woke up and it was already done," Benjamin said, his voice hard. "That's how good Richard is at lying. He looked me in the eye every single day while he was forging my name on documents, bribing my employees, and planning to destroy me. I trusted him completely, and he used that trust to take everything I'd worked for." Richard's lead lawyer, a shark-faced woman named Diana Brooks, stood up for cross-examination. Grace's stomach clenched. Diana had a reputation for tearing witnesses apart. "Mr. Park, isn't it true that you were drinking heavily during the months before Mr. Sterling took over the company?" Diana asked. "I had a glass of wine with dinner sometimes," Benjamin replied carefully. "I wasn't drinking heavily." "Really?" Diana held up a series of photos. "These pictures show you stumbling out of various bars and clubs. You appear quite drunk in several of them." Grace leaned forward, studying the photos. Something was wrong with them. The man in the pictures looked like Benjamin, but the details were off. The clothes weren't quite right. The watch on his wrist wasn't Benjamin's style. "Those photos are fake," Benjamin said firmly. "I'm not even sure that's me in all of them. The faces could be digitally altered." "How convenient," Diana said with a cold smile. "You claim the photos are fake, just like you claim the signatures on the transfer documents are fake, just like you claim every piece of evidence against you is somehow fabricated. Isn't it more likely, Mr. Park, that you're the one lying? That you did sign over your shares to Mr. Sterling, perhaps during one of your drinking binges, and now you regret it and want your company back?" "That's not true," Benjamin said, his voice rising. "I never signed anything. Richard forged my signatures. We have handwriting experts who've proven it." "Handwriting experts who you're paying," Diana countered. "Mr. Park, let's talk about your current situation. You've been living with a woman named Grace Mbala for several weeks now. Ms. Mbala is a nurse at Memorial Hospital. Isn't it true that you met her while you were pretending to be homeless?" Grace felt her blood run cold. How did they know about her? "I wasn't pretending," Benjamin said. "I was actually homeless because Richard stole everything from me." "Or," Diana said, walking toward the jury, "you were running a con. You pretended to be homeless to win the sympathy of a kind, naive young woman. You used her for a place to stay, for money, for support in your frivolous lawsuit. Tell me, Mr. Park, how much money has Ms. Mbala given you since you moved into her apartment?" "Grace hasn't given me money," Benjamin said through gritted teeth. "She's given me something more valuable. She believed in me when everyone else thought I was finished. She's the most honest, genuine person I've ever met, and you don't get to talk about her like she's some fool I'm using. So you admit you're in a relationship with her? Diana pressed. A romantic relationship? Yes, Benjamin said, looking directly at Grace. I love her. She saved my life. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Diana smiled like a cat who'd caught a mouse. How touching. So this nurse, who makes about $50,000 a year, has welcomed a supposed billionaire into her modest apartment out of the goodness of her heart. And we're supposed to believe there's nothing calculated about this relationship? That she's not hoping for a big payday if you somehow win this case? Grace jumped to her feet. That's a lie, she shouted. The judge banged his gavel. Order. Young lady, sit down or I'll have you removed from the courtroom. Thomas grabbed Grace's arm and pulled her back into her seat, but she was shaking with fury. How dare they suggest she was with Benjamin for money? She'd helped him when he had nothing, when he was literally homeless. Benjamin was glaring at Diana with pure hatred. Grace isn't like that. She's not like you people who only care about money and power. She has a good heart, something you clearly know nothing about. Mr. Park, please answer the question, the judge said wearily. Is it possible that Ms. Mbala is motivated by the prospect of financial gain if you win this lawsuit? Absolutely not, Benjamin said firmly. Grace doesn't care about money. She cares about people. She cares about doing what's right. Those are concepts that Richard Sterling and his lawyers can't understand because they've never experienced them. The trial continued for another 2 hours, but Grace barely heard any of it. She was too busy trying to control her anger and humiliation. When they finally broke for the day, reporters swarmed Grace the moment she stepped outside the courthouse. Ms. Mbala, is it true you're in a relationship with Benjamin Park? How did you meet Mr. Park? Are you hoping to get rich if he wins his company back? Did you know he was a billionaire when you started helping him? Grace pushed through the crowd, saying nothing until Benjamin appeared at her side with Thomas and 2 security guards the lawyer had hired. They formed a protective circle around Grace and got her to the car. I'm so sorry, Benjamin said, as soon as they were alone in the back seat. I never wanted you to be dragged into this circus. Grace, if you want to walk away, I'll understand. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Grace turned to him, her eyes blazing. I'm not walking away. Benjamin, I don't care what those lawyers say about me. I don't care what the newspapers write. I know the truth. I know why I helped you, and it had nothing to do with money. I did it because I saw a good man who needed help, and I fell in love with that man. Nothing they say can change that. Benjamin pulled her into his arms and kissed her fiercely. I don't deserve you, he whispered against her lips. Yes, you do, Grace said. And we're going to prove to everyone that love and truth are stronger than lies and greed. But the attacks didn't stop. Over the next week, Grace's life became a nightmare. Reporters camped outside her apartment building. Her photo was in every newspaper and on every news website, usually with headlines like Gold Digger Nurse Supports Disgraced CEO or Foreign Nurse in Scheme to Defraud Tech Company. At the hospital, some of her coworkers started treating her differently. Mrs. Chen called her into the office and suggested she take an extended leave of absence until this media attention dies down. Grace refused, insisting on working her shifts, but it was horrible. Patients recognized her and made comments. Other nurses whispered behind her back. The only bright spot was that Grace's family in Cameroon rallied around her. Her mother called every day to pray with her and remind her to stay strong. Her sisters sent messages of support. Even relatives she barely knew reached out to say they believed in her. Benjamin felt terrible about what Grace was going through. Every night, he held her while she cried tears of frustration and anger. He promised her over and over that when this was done, he would make it all worth it. Then, On the 8th day of the trial, Diana Brooks played her trump card. Your Honor, the defense would like to call a witness, Diana announced. We call Grace Mbala to the stand. Grace's heart stopped. Thomas jumped to his feet. Objection. Ms. Mbala is not involved in this case. She's a private citizen who has no relevant testimony to offer. On the contrary, Diana said smoothly, Ms. Mbala has been living with Mr. Park and supporting him financially during this trial. She has direct knowledge of his activities and state of mind. Her testimony is absolutely relevant. The judge considered for a moment, then nodded. I'll allow it. Ms. Mbala, please take the stand. Grace's legs felt like water as she walked to the witness stand. She avoided looking at Benjamin, knowing that if she saw the worry in his eyes, she might break down. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Diana approached her with a predatory smile. Miss Mbala, thank you for joining us. Let's start with a simple question. How much money have you spent supporting Benjamin Park since he moved into your apartment? I don't know exactly, Grace said, her voice steadier than she felt. I didn't keep track because I wasn't doing it for money. I was doing it because it was the right thing to do. How noble, Diana said sarcastically. But surely you must have some idea. Thousands of dollars? Tens of thousands? Maybe a few thousand, Grace admitted. For food, transportation, things like that. And did Mr. Park promise to pay you back this money? Diana asked. Grace hesitated. Benjamin had promised to repay her 1,000,000 times over, but if she said that, it would sound like they had a financial arrangement. He offered, but I told him it wasn't necessary. So you gave thousands of dollars to a man you barely knew, asking nothing in return? Diana's voice was full of disbelief. Ms. Mbala, are you really that naive, or are you lying to this court? I'm telling the truth, Grace said, lifting her chin. I helped Benjamin because I saw he needed help. That's what good people do. They help each other without expecting payment. Diana laughed coldly. Or perhaps you saw an opportunity, a chance to get close to a man who used to be a billionaire, who might be a billionaire again if he wins this case. Tell me, Ms. Mbala, has Mr. Park made any promises to you about what he'll do if he gets his company back? Has he promised to marry you, perhaps? To make you rich? Grace felt her face flush, remembering all the things Benjamin had whispered to her in the dark, promises of marriage and a future together. But those were private moments, sacred moments, and she wasn't going to let this horrible woman twist them into something dirty. Benjamin and I have discussed our future together, Grace said carefully. But those discussions are private and have nothing to do with this case. I think they have everything to do with this case, Diana said. I think you're a young immigrant woman who saw a chance to improve your situation, and you latched onto Benjamin Park like a parasite. I think you're supporting his false claims against Mr. Sterling because you hope to benefit financially when this is all over. You're wrong, Grace said, her voice shaking with anger now. I'm from Cameroon, yes. I came to America with nothing but my education and my determination to build a better life. I became a nurse because I want to help people. When I saw Benjamin sitting outside my hospital, hungry and alone, I helped him because that's who I am, not because of who he used to be or what he might become, but because he needed help, and I could give it. Grace turned to look directly at the jury. I fell in love with Benjamin Park when he was homeless, when he had nothing. When everyone else in the world had abandoned him, I stood by him because I saw his character, his strength, his goodness. You can call me naive if you want. You can say I'm stupid for believing in him. But I know the truth. Benjamin is honest and Richard Sterling is a thief. And no matter what you say about me, that truth doesn't change. The courtroom was completely silent when Grace finished. Even Diana looked slightly taken aback by the passion in her voice. Then, the prosecutor stood up for redirect examination. Ms. Mbala, one question, he said gently. If Benjamin Park never gets his company back, if he remains homeless and penniless for the rest of his life, would you still stay with him? Grace didn't hesitate. Yes, I love him for who he is, not what he owns. Thank you, the prosecutor said. No further questions. Grace stepped down from the stand on shaking legs. As she walked past the defense table, Richard Sterling caught her eye and smiled. Coldly, Grace felt a chill run down her spine. There was something cruel in that smile, something that promised this wasn't over. That night, as Grace and Benjamin lay in bed, neither of them could sleep. The trial would conclude tomorrow with closing arguments and then go to the jury. Everything they'd fought for came down to whether 12 strangers believed their story. No matter what happens tomorrow, I want you to know something, Benjamin said, pulling Grace closer. You're the bravest, most incredible person I've ever met. The way you stood up to Diana Brooks today, the way you defended me and our relationship, Grace, I've never been prouder of anyone in my life. I was so scared, Grace admitted. But then I thought about everything we've been through together, and I knew I couldn't let them make us seem dirty or wrong. What we have is beautiful, Benjamin. It's real. It's the realest thing in my life, Benjamin agreed. He turned her to face him, his eyes serious in the dim light. Grace, I meant what I told you before. When this is over, I want to marry you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me? Grace felt tears slide down her cheeks. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. They sealed the promise with a kiss that turned heated, both of them seeking comfort and connection in each other's bodies. They made love slowly, tenderly, each touch a promise of forever. But across town, in his luxury penthouse, Richard Sterling was making very different plans. He'd just gotten off the phone with Victor Kane. The trial's not going our way, Richard said, pacing in front of his floor-to-ceiling windows. That nurse was too convincing on the stand. The jury liked her. We need to do something to change the narrative. What did you have in mind, boss? Victor asked. Richard smiled coldly. Grace Mbala has family in Cameroon, doesn't she? A mother, sisters, aunts, and uncles? Yes, Victor confirmed, checking his phone. We've got files on all of them. Good, Richard said. I want you to send someone to deliver a message to the family. Tell them that if Benjamin doesn't drop this lawsuit immediately, something very unfortunate might happen to them. Be creative, Victor. Make sure they understand we're serious. Consider it done, Victor said. Richard hung up and poured himself a drink, feeling satisfied. Benjamin might have the law on his side, but Richard had money and power and the willingness to do whatever it took to win. Tomorrow would bring a new crisis for the happy couple, one that would force them to choose between justice and protecting the people they loved. The battle was reaching its climax, and someone was about to get hurt. Grace's phone rang at 2 in the morning, dragging her from a restless sleep. She fumbled for it in the darkness, Benjamin stirring beside her. Hello? Grace mumbled, still half asleep. Grace? Oh, thank God. It was her sister Marie, calling from Cameroon. Her voice was high and panicked. Grace sat up immediately, her heart racing. Marie, what's wrong? Is Mama okay? Mama's fine, but Grace, something terrible happened. 2 men came to the house today. They said they had a message for you from someone named Richard Sterling. Marie's voice broke into sobs. They said if Benjamin doesn't stop the lawsuit, they're going to hurt our family. They knew everything about us, Grace. Where we live, where the children go to school, everything. We're so scared. Grace felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Benjamin was fully awake now, his face grim as he listened to Grace's side of the conversation. Marie, listen to me, Grace said, forcing her voice to stay calm even though she was shaking. I want you to take Mama and go stay with Uncle Joseph in Douala. Don't tell anyone where you're going. I'm going to fix this. I promise. How can you fix it? Marie cried. Grace, these men were serious. They had guns. Please, you have to make Benjamin stop this lawsuit. It's not worth our lives. I'll call you back, Grace said, her voice breaking. She hung up and turned to Benjamin, tears streaming down her face. Richard threatened my family. He sent men with guns to my mother's house. Benjamin's face went white with rage. That's it. I'm ending this. I'll call Thomas right now and tell him to drop the lawsuit. No! Grace grabbed his arm. Benjamin, you can't. If you drop the lawsuit, Richard wins. He keeps your company and he gets away with everything he's done. We can't let him win. I don't care about the company, Benjamin shouted. Grace, I'm not going to let your family get hurt because of me. I won't do it. And I won't let Richard Sterling destroy you, Grace shouted back. We've come too far to give up now. There has to be another way. They stared at each other in the dim bedroom, both breathing hard, both terrified and furious. Finally, Benjamin pulled Grace into his arms. I can't lose you, he whispered, and I can't be responsible for anything happening to your family. Grace, what are we going to do? Grace pulled back, wiping her eyes. An idea was forming in her mind. You said you had backup files from TechVision, right? Documents and evidence that you kept separate from the main office? Yes, Benjamin said slowly. I kept copies of everything in a storage unit in Baltimore. It's how I always did business. Never trust that one location will be safe. Why? Because the storage unit in Baltimore was the one Susan Chen used for her backup server, Grace said, her mind racing. You told me once that you rented several units there for different types of storage. What if there's something in one of those other units that we haven't checked yet? Something that could end this trial immediately? Benjamin's eyes widened. The contracts. Grace, you're brilliant. When Richard and I first started TechVision, we signed a partnership agreement that said neither of us could make major company decisions without the other's written consent. I kept the original in a fireproof safe in one of my Baltimore units. If we can get that document and show it to the judge, it proves that Richard couldn't legally transfer my shares even if I had signed the papers, which I didn't. Then we have to go get it, Grace said. Right now, before Richard figures out it exists. It's 3 in the morning, Benjamin protested. And Grace, it's too dangerous. If Richard was willing to threaten your family in Cameroon, imagine what he'll do if he catches us in Baltimore. We don't have a choice, Grace said firmly. The trial concludes today with closing arguments. If we can give that partnership agreement to Thomas before court starts, it could change everything. We have to try, Benjamin. Benjamin looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, but we're doing this smart. I'll call Thomas and tell him to arrange police protection for us, and I'm bringing a weapon. You have a weapon? Grace asked, surprised. Thomas gave me his licensed handgun yesterday, Benjamin admitted. Just in case. I didn't want to worry you, but things have been getting more dangerous. They threw on clothes and were on the road to Baltimore within 30 minutes. Thomas met them at a rest stop halfway there, bringing 2 off-duty police officers he'd hired as bodyguards. This is insane, Thomas said, handing them coffee. If the judge finds out we're pulling new evidence at the last minute, he could throw out the whole case. He won't throw it out if the evidence proves Richard committed fraud, Benjamin argued. Thomas, that partnership agreement is ironclad. It shows that every decision Richard made after he pushed me out was illegal because I never consented to anything. Fine, Thomas sighed. But I'm coming with you, and so are Officers Martinez and Chen. We're not taking any chances. They reached the Baltimore storage facility just as dawn was breaking. This time, there were no black SUVs, no men in suits. Everything looked quiet and normal. Unit 153, Benjamin said, checking the key. It's at the back of the facility. The group moved through the storage units cautiously, the 2 police officers keeping watch. Grace's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. They were so close. If they could just get this evidence and get out safely, they could win. Benjamin unlocked Unit 153 and pulled up the rolling door. Inside was a small fireproof safe, just as he'd remembered. He knelt down and started working the combination. "Hurry," Officer Martinez said nervously, scanning the area. "This place is too quiet. I don't like it." The safe clicked open. Benjamin reached inside and pulled out a thick legal document in a protective sleeve. "Got it. This is the partnership agreement." "Then let's move," Thomas said urgently. "Now." They were halfway back to the cars when Grace heard it. The sound of engines, multiple vehicles approaching fast. "Run," Officer Chen shouted. They ran, but it was too late. Three black SUVs screeched into the parking lot, blocking all the exits. Victor Kane stepped out of the lead vehicle with 6 men, all carrying guns. "Going somewhere, Benjamin?" Victor called out, his voice mocking. The police officers drew their weapons. "Boston P. Everyone stay where you are." "You're out of your jurisdiction, officers," Victor said with a cold smile. "This is Baltimore, and I've got friends in the Baltimore police who won't be happy to hear you're operating without local authorization." "We don't need authorization to protect citizens from armed criminals," Martinez said firmly. "Drop your weapons or we will open fire." The situation was a powder keg ready to explode. Grace saw it all happening in slow motion. The guns, the angry men, Benjamin clutching the partnership agreement that could save everything or cost them their lives. Then, Benjamin did something unexpected. He held up the document where everyone could see it. "Victor, tell Richard that I have the original partnership agreement right here," Benjamin called out. "It proves that every move he made to steal Techvision was illegal. Even if we don't make it out of here today, Thomas has copies. This document will be in the judge's hands in 2 hours no matter what you do." Victor's confident expression faltered. He pulled out his phone and stepped away, clearly calling Richard. Grace watched him argue with whoever was on the other end, his face getting redder and angrier. Finally, Victor hung up and turned back to them. "You win this round, Park, but Richard says to tell you that your victory won't last long. He's got other ways to hurt you." "Tell Richard I'm not afraid of him anymore," Benjamin said, "and tell him that if anything happens to Grace's family in Cameroon, I'll make it my life's mission to destroy him. Not just take back my company, but ruin everything he's ever built." Victor gestured to his men, and they got back in their vehicles. Within minutes, the SUVs were gone, leaving the group standing in the parking lot, shaking with adrenaline. "We need to get this document to the courthouse immediately," Thomas said, checking his watch. "Court starts in 3 hours." They drove back to Boston at record speed, the police escort ensuring they weren't followed. Grace sat in the back seat with Benjamin, holding his hand and trying to process everything that had just happened. "We almost died," she said quietly. "But we didn't," Benjamin replied, bringing her hand to his lips. "Grace, I need you to understand something. What you did today, insisting we get this evidence even when it was dangerous, that took more courage than anything I've ever seen. You're a warrior." "I'm just a nurse from Cameroon who fell in love with the wrong billionaire," Grace said, managing a weak smile. "The right billionaire," Benjamin corrected, "and soon, hopefully, the proven rightfully owned his company billionaire." They made it to the courthouse with an hour to spare. Thomas rushed the partnership agreement to the judge's chambers while Benjamin and Grace waited anxiously outside the courtroom. Reporters swarmed them again, but this time, Benjamin held Grace's hand high and proud. "I have an announcement," Benjamin told the cameras. "Today, new evidence will be presented that proves beyond any doubt that Richard Sterling stole my company through illegal means. And when this trial is over and I've won, the first thing I'm going to do is ask Grace Mbala to marry me officially in front of all of you, because I want the world to know that this woman is my hero." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Benjamin, you already asked me. I already said yes." "I know," Benjamin grinned, But I wanted to make it public. I wanted everyone to know that you're going to be my wife, and I'm the luckiest man alive. The courtroom erupted in camera flashes and shouted questions, but Grace only had eyes for Benjamin. Despite everything they'd been through, despite the danger and the stress and the fear, they were still standing. They were still fighting. They were still in love. Inside the courtroom, the judge reviewed the partnership agreement with both sets of lawyers. Diana Brooks looked like she'd swallowed something sour while Thomas was practically glowing with satisfaction. "This document appears to be authentic," the judge said finally, "and if it is, it significantly undermines the defense's entire case. Mr. Sterling, did you have Mr. Park's written consent for the share transfers you executed?" Richard stood up, his face pale. For the first time since the trial began, he looked scared. "Your Honor, that agreement was from when we first started the company. It doesn't apply to later decisions. Actually, Mr. Sterling, it specifically states that it applies to all major company decisions in perpetuity unless both parties agree in writing to modify it," the judge said, reading from the document. "Do you have any written modifications signed by both you and Mr. Park?" "No, Your Honor," Diana Brooks admitted reluctantly. "Then, I'm ruling that all share transfers executed without Mr. Park's written consent are null and void," the judge declared. "Furthermore, based on the evidence presented, including Ms. Chen's testimony and this partnership agreement, I'm finding sufficient cause to believe that Mr. Sterling engaged in fraud and forgery. I'm referring this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution." The courtroom exploded. Reporters rushed out to file their stories. Richard Sterling stood frozen at the defense table, his world crashing down around him. Victor Kane, sitting in the back row, quietly slipped out a side door. Benjamin grabbed Grace and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around. "We won! Grace, we won!" "You won," Grace corrected, laughing and crying at the same time. "You got your company back." "We won," Benjamin insisted. "None of this would have happened without you. You're my partner in everything now, Grace. Everything." Thomas approached them, grinning from ear to ear. "Congratulations, Benjamin. Tech Vision Industries is yours again. The judge is issuing orders to freeze all of Richard's assets and transfer control of the company back to you, effective immediately." "What about my family?" Grace asked urgently. "Is there any way to protect them from Richard?" "Richard won't be threatening anyone anymore," Thomas assured her. "He's about to be arrested on multiple felony charges. He'll be lucky if he's not in prison for the next 20 years. And I've already contacted the police in Cameroon. They're providing protection for your family until we're certain there's no more threat." Grace sagged with relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "Thank you," Thomas said warmly. "Grace, you saved this case when you insisted on getting that partnership agreement. You saved Benjamin. You're pretty amazing." Over the next few hours, everything happened fast. Richard Sterling was arrested right there in the courthouse, led away in handcuffs while cameras flashed. Victor Kane was picked up trying to leave the state. The Tech Vision Board of Directors held an emergency meeting and unanimously voted to reinstate Benjamin as CEO. By evening, Benjamin Park was a billionaire again, his reputation restored, his company returned to him. News outlets across the country were running stories about the dramatic trial and the nurse who'd stood by the disgraced CEO when everyone else abandoned him. But Benjamin didn't care about any of that. All he cared about was the woman sitting next to him in the back of a limousine as they drove through Boston. "Where are we going?" Grace asked. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, but happy. "You'll see," Benjamin said mysteriously. The limousine pulled up to a luxury hotel, one of the fanciest in Boston. Benjamin led Grace inside to the penthouse suite, where an elaborate dinner was laid out, along with champagne and roses. "Benjamin, this is too much," Grace protested. Nothing is too much for you, Benjamin said. He pulled out a small box and dropped to one knee. Grace Mbala, I know I already asked you to marry me, but I wanted to do it right this time, with a ring and everything. He opened the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring, the kind Grace had only seen in magazines. I love you, Benjamin continued, his voice thick with emotion. I love your kindness, your courage, your strength. I love how you see the best in people. I love how you stood by me when I had nothing. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me. Will you marry me? Yes, Grace whispered, tears streaming down her face. Yes, yes, yes. Benjamin slipped the ring onto her finger and stood up, pulling her into his arms for a deep, passionate kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grace laughed. We did it, she said. We actually did it. We did it, Benjamin agreed. Together. They made love that night with a joy and freedom they never experienced before, celebrating their victory and their love. Afterwards, lying tangled together in the enormous bed, Benjamin traced patterns on Grace's bare shoulder. I have plans, he said softly. Big plans for us. Tell me, Grace urged, snuggling closer. First, I'm going to reform TechVision. Richard was using our software to help insurance companies deny patient claims. I'm going to fix that immediately and get us back to our original mission of helping patients. Then, I'm going to start a foundation to help homeless people in honor of the 3 weeks I spent on the streets. And I want you to be part of all of it, Grace. I want us to build something beautiful together. What about my nursing? Grace asked. Keep it if you want, Benjamin said. Or, if you'd rather work at Tech Vision with me, we can make that happen. Or, if you want to open that clinic you always dreamed about, I'll fund it. Whatever you want, Grace. Your dreams are my dreams now. Grace turned in his arms to face him. My dream is to be with you and to help people. As long as we can do both, I'll be happy. Then, we're going to be happy for the rest of our lives, Benjamin promised. But even as they made plans for their future, neither of them knew that the danger wasn't quite over. In a jail cell across town, Richard Sterling was making a phone call to someone even more dangerous than Victor Kane. Someone who owed him favors. Someone who wouldn't let a little thing like Richard being in jail stop them from getting revenge on Benjamin Park and the nurse who destroyed their plans. The real battle was just beginning. 2 months after the trial ended, Grace stood in front of a full-length mirror in a private suite at the Four Seasons Hotel in Philadelphia, staring at her reflection in disbelief. The wedding dress was magnificent. Ivory silk with delicate lace details and a train that seemed to go on forever. Her sisters had flown in from Cameroon to help her get ready, and they were fussing over every detail. You look like a princess, Marie said, adjusting Grace's veil with tears in her eyes. I still can't believe this is real. My little sister is marrying a billionaire. I'm marrying Benjamin, Grace corrected gently. The fact that he's a billionaire is just a bonus. Her mother entered the room, elegant in a traditional Cameroonian outfit, and stopped in her tracks when she saw Grace. My daughter, she whispered, her voice breaking. You are so beautiful. Your father would have been so proud. Grace hugged her mother carefully, trying not to crush her dress. I wish he could be here, Mama. He is here, her mother said, touching Grace's heart. He's right here, watching over you and smiling. You did good, Grace. You followed your heart, and look where it brought you. A knock on the door interrupted them. One of Benjamin's assistants poked her head in. Ms. Mbala, there's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent. Grace frowned. Who is it? A woman named Rachel Montgomery. She says she knows Mr. Park. Grace felt her stomach clench. She knew that name. Rachel Montgomery was the wealthy socialite Benjamin's mother had tried to set him up with during the trial, the one who had later claimed to be pregnant with his baby, even though they'd never been intimate. Benjamin had exposed her lies publicly, and Grace had thought that was the end of it. "Send her away," Marie said protectively. "Grace, you don't need this drama today." "No," Grace said, straightening her shoulders. "Let her in. I want to hear what she has to say." Rachel swept into the room like she owned it, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than Grace used to make in a year. She was beautiful in a cold, polished way, with blonde hair perfectly styled and makeup applied by professionals. "Well," Rachel said, looking Grace up and down, "you actually went through with it. I have to admit, I didn't think you had it in you to land Benjamin Park." "Is there a point to this visit?" Grace asked calmly, even though her heart was racing. "Because I'm getting married in 20 minutes, and I'd rather not waste time on whatever game you're playing." Rachel's perfect smile faltered slightly. "I'm not here to play games. I'm here to warn you. Do you really think this fairy tale is going to last? Benjamin is used to a certain lifestyle, a certain type of woman. You're a nurse from Africa. How long do you think it'll be before he gets bored and starts looking for someone more suitable?" Grace's sisters gasped, but Grace held up a hand to stop them from intervening. She walked closer to Rachel until they were face to face. "Let me tell you something about Benjamin Park," Grace said quietly but firmly. "He's the most honest, loyal, loving man I've ever met. He stood by me when people like you were calling me a gold digger and worse. He protected me when Richard Sterling threatened my family. He chose me every single day, not because of what I could give him, but because of who I am. So, no, Rachel, I'm not worried about him getting bored. I'm confident in our love because it's built on truth and respect, not money or social status." Rachel's face flushed red. "You think you're so special, but you're not. You got lucky. That's all. You happened to be in the right place at the right time." "Maybe," Grace agreed with a small smile. "Or maybe I was exactly where I needed to be to meet the man I was meant to spend my life with. Either way, Rachel, this is my wedding day, and you're not welcome here. Please leave." For a moment, Rachel looked like she might argue, but something in Grace's steady gaze made her think better of it. She turned on her designer heels and stalked out, slamming the door behind her. Grace's mother rushed to her side. "Are you okay, my daughter?" "I'm perfect, Mama," Grace said, and she meant it. Rachel's words hadn't shaken her confidence at all. If anything, they'd reminded her of how far she and Benjamin had come together. 20 minutes later, Grace walked down the aisle of a beautiful historic church in Philadelphia, her arm linked with her uncle's, since her father had passed years ago. The church was filled with hundreds of guests: Benjamin's business associates, Grace's co-workers from the hospital, friends and family from both America and Cameroon, and even some of the reporters who had covered their story. But Grace only had eyes for Benjamin, standing at the altar in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. When she reached him, he took her hands and she saw tears shining in his eyes. "You're so beautiful," he whispered as the ceremony began. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about two people from different worlds finding each other against all odds. When it was time for vows, Benjamin went first. "Grace, when I met you, I was at my lowest point. I had lost everything: my company, my reputation, my hope. But you saw past all of that. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. You fed me when I was hungry, sheltered me when I was homeless, and believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. You didn't just save my life, Grace. You gave me a reason to fight, a reason to hope, a reason to become the man you deserve. I promise to love you, honor you, and stand by your side through whatever challenges life brings us. You're my angel, my partner, and my best friend. I love you more than words can say." Grace was crying by the time he finished, and her voice shook as she delivered her own vows. Benjamin, before I met you, I thought I knew what love was. But you showed me that real love is about seeing someone at their worst and choosing to stay. It's about fighting together against impossible odds. It's about building something beautiful from nothing. You've given me so much, not just material things, but confidence, strength, and the courage to dream bigger than I ever thought possible. I promise to be your partner in all things, to support your dreams as you've supported mine, and to remind you every day that you're worthy of love. You're my miracle, Benjamin. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life being grateful that I gave you that sandwich. Everyone in the church laughed through their tears at the last line. Benjamin grinned and squeezed her hands. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister declared. You may kiss your bride. Benjamin pulled Grace into his arms and kissed her deeply, to thunderous applause from their guests. When they finally broke apart, both grinning, the minister presented them to the congregation. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin Park. The reception was held at the most elegant venue in Philadelphia, with food from both American and Cameroonian cuisines, music that had everyone dancing, and speeches that made people laugh and cry in equal measure. Benjamin's mother, Helen, who had initially opposed the marriage, gave a tearful toast about how Grace had taught her that love and character mattered more than social status. I was wrong about you, Grace, Helen admitted in front of hundreds of guests. I judged you without knowing you, and I'm sorry, but my son saw what I was too blind to see, that you're an extraordinary woman with a heart of gold. Welcome to our family. I promise to be the best mother-in-law I can be. Grace hugged Helen tightly, forgiving her completely. This was a day for new beginnings, not holding grudges. As the evening wore on, Benjamin pulled Grace onto the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. As they swayed to the music, he whispered in her ear, I have a surprise for you. Another one? Grace laughed. Benjamin had already surprised her with a honeymoon trip to the Maldives and a donation to build a new hospital wing in Cameroon in her father's name. This one's special, Benjamin promised. He gestured to Thomas, who brought over a folder. Remember how you always dreamed of opening your own clinic? Well, I bought a building in Roxbury, one of Boston's underserved neighborhoods. It's yours, Grace. Your own clinic where you can help people who need it most. We'll staff it with the best doctors and nurses, and no one will ever be turned away because they can't pay. Grace stared at the deed in her hands, tears streaming down her face. Benjamin, this is too much. This is everything I ever wanted. You deserve everything you ever wanted, Benjamin said, wiping away her tears. Grace, we're going to do so much good together. Tech Vision is back to helping patients instead of hurting them. We're funding homeless shelters in 5 cities. And now you'll have your clinic. We're going to change lives. You and me together. I love you so much, Grace said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. The party continued late into the night, filled with joy and laughter and hope. Grace danced with her mother, with her sisters, with Benjamin's business partners, and her nursing school friends. She looked around at all the people who had supported them through their journey, and she felt overwhelming gratitude. At midnight, Benjamin swept Grace away to the limousine that would take them to the airport for their honeymoon. As they drove through the Philadelphia streets, Grace leaned against her husband's shoulder. Are you happy? Benjamin asked softly. Happier than I ever imagined possible, Grace replied honestly. Benjamin, do you ever think about that day outside the hospital? The day I gave you the sandwich? Every day, Benjamin said. That was the day my life changed. That was the day I met my soulmate. I was so scared you'd disappear, Grace admitted. I almost didn't go back the next morning. I thought maybe you were just a dream. Best decision you ever made going back, Benjamin said with a smile. Although I would have found you anyway. Once I saw you, Grace, there was no way I wasn't going to find you again. They arrived at the private airport where Benjamin's jet was waiting. As they boarded, Grace looked back at Philadelphia, at the city where they'd just pledged their lives to each other, and she smiled. This was just the beginning. They had a whole lifetime ahead of them, building businesses, helping people, raising the family they both wanted, and loving each other through whatever challenges came their way. Grace thought about how far they'd come from that cold autumn morning when she'd given a sandwich to a homeless stranger. She'd saved his life that day, but he'd saved hers too, in ways she was still discovering. As the plane took off toward their honeymoon and their future, Benjamin pulled Grace close and kissed her temple. "Forever starts now, Mrs. Park. Forever started the day I met you," Grace whispered back. "This is just the next chapter." And it was a chapter filled with love, hope, and infinite possibilities. Thank you so much for watching this incredible love story. If you enjoyed Grace and Benjamin's journey from that life-changing sandwich to their beautiful forever, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another amazing story. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from and what part of their love story touched your heart the most. We love hearing from you. Share this video with someone who believes in the power of kindness and true love, because stories like this remind us that miracles happen when we choose compassion over indifference.